Hello, and welcome to the weekly broadcast of Strategic Speaking for Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and we are talking today about do you get questions when you're doing a presentation? Is your audience maybe confused? Are you sure you're speaking their language? Do they really understand what you're talking about? This is number 2 of 4 broadcasts that I'm doing for the Visible and Valued Training Month, during which I'm going through some of the 17 keys to audience engagement. Today, I want to talk about, once again, being in the shoes of your listeners so that you can put yourself into their position. What do they need to know? What are they looking for? What's in it for them? I've spoken about this before many times. I think it's rule 1 of presenting. But the other part is, as you're talking to a group, you're talking about information that you have. If you're speaking to a group that doesn't already know, before you actually give your presentation, have somebody with fresh eyes look at it. This is something that I do for my clients all the time, and I pay people to do that for me because it's so easy to miss a connection, miss something where the connection from A to B is obvious to you, but not necessarily for your listeners. Quite often, I find myself telling a client, yes, this should be obvious, but you do have to say it out loud. And I have people who say that to me. We're saying, wait, well, now, how did you get from this idea to this idea? What's missing? And quite often it's something that I forgot to include because I knew it, my brain filled it in, so I didn't write it down as one of the things that needed to be said. This is very important especially if you're doing a speech to a group that doesn't know you. The other part of putting yourself in the shoes of your listeners is to make sure that they know why they should care. I spoke about this a little bit last week, and I'm going to say it again this week. What's in it for them? As you're talking to a group, make sure that they understand why they should care. Why should they be paying attention? What's in it for them? And let's talk about language, the choice of words. It may be that your audience is confused and asking you questions because you aren't speaking clearly. This is one of the things I learned in 30 years in the opera business, working with people from around the world. Most of us would working in our second or third language. One of the things that happens often when you're rehearsing an opera with an international cast is everybody gets together on day 1 and you say, what is our language going to be? It's either usually English or German or Italian. So which one do most people speak? And then that will be the common language that we'll work with. It is assumed that if you're, by the time you get to the point of working internationally, it is assumed that you will speak 2 or 3 languages. Well, that's the same in business, especially nowadays. Business is more and more international, and the people you are working with, if you're speaking English, it might be their second language or their third language. It might be your second language or third language. Make sure when you are speaking that you are slow and clear, and that key phrases, your golden nuggets, if you will, that you've practiced saying them. One of the problems I see all the time is when you have a speaker who gets nervous and they're doing a presentation and they start talking really fast, and then they're doing blah, 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 blah. it's hard to understand even if they're speaking English and it is your first language. Key phrases, especially unusual phrases, need to be pronounced clearly. The other thing that gets people in trouble a lot is if you are an expert on something, maybe you have written a scientific paper or an article about something, or you've written a book. Language designed to be read, language for the page, is not the same as language designed to be spoken. You have to make sure that you are saying things in a way that people can understand. Sometimes that means making your language simpler. A complicated technical phrase that works on the page isn't going to work if people aren't going to understand you. And if they don't understand you, they will tune out and go do something else, which is all too easy these days. Here's a specific tip that you can use. If you have an unusual name, remember that our names and the names of our companies are the things that we say more than anything else. If you have an unusual name, say the first name and say your first and last name. For instance, you would say Elizabeth Bachman. Now, I would do that because there are cultures where I speak. When I worked in Japan, no one could ever say Elizabeth. No one ever understood my first name. So I would say it once, and then I would repeat it. And oftentimes hearing it the second time around, people would understand, and then they have space left in their brain to process the last name. This is important for anyone who has a name that starts or ends with a vowel. My friend Samira Ahmed would say, I'm Samira Ahmed. You could never understand. I asked her to say Samira Ahmed. You need the break between the first and the last name. This also matters for your business, especially if you're with a company that has an unusual name. So often nowadays, people have to do a variation on a familiar word. If you need to say what the name of your company is, make sure you pronounce it. Pronounce the beginning and the end of each word, and pronounce and honor the spaces between. Just slow yourself down so that the important part gets heard. Now, these are only a couple of basically the 17 keys to speaker engagement, to audience engagement, which is one of the products that I talk about in the Visible and Valued Training Month. If you're interested, please send me a message here. I'll be posting a link to some information at the bottom in the comments below. And in the meantime, have a wonderful week. I'll see you on the next one.